Let me tell you how it was. I know I can do this. I have the powers. I take them here. I have the right. My words may be poor, but they will have to do. There was a time when I could not do this. I remember that time. These are the opening lines to Danish composer Hans Abrahamsen's 2013 work for soprano and orchestra, Let Me Tell You. I've always been struck by this text, the repetition of I know, I have, I take, I could, I remember. The clarity of some ideas versus the ambiguity of others, the construction of the text in short bursts. It feels breathless on one level, she's summoning the courage to speak, but from another view it is bold and clear. It feels direct, but it also feels constrained in its vocabulary, mainly because it actually is. The text for the piece is taken from Paul Griffiths' 2008 novel of the same name, a novel constructed only using the words that Ophelia speaks in Hamlet. Let Me Tell You is essentially Ophelia's autobiography. Griffiths is using her language to allow her to tell her own story, or to give her something of what she may be, as he puts it. Self-imposed constraint has existed for as long as humans have created art. Think of Picasso's Blue period, where he painted almost exclusively with blue and blue-green. Or Michael Johansson, who creates sculptures and works of art within the confines of restricted space. Or Austin Kleon, who creates poems by blacking out lines in newspaper articles. Then there's Georges Perec, whose novel La Disparition is constructed entirely without using the letter E. Perec is part of an experimental literary collective known as Oulipo, a collection of French novelists who use constraint and restriction in their work. And it's under this category that Let Me Tell You also falls. It is certainly no easy task to write a 40,000-word novel just using Ophelia's words. Ophelia only says 483 unique words in the play. And of these words, she only uses 166 that are part of the 850 words that are considered core vocabulary in basic English. Of the words that she does use, she rarely uses both the singular and plural form of a word, and when she does, they're not the most useful. 30 of her 483 words are archaic, more are rare, and some have identical meanings to words that have come before. Things are made even more difficult with the words that she doesn't use. Ophelia doesn't use the word mother, particularly challenging in an autobiography, especially with a whole chapter devoted to their relationship. But Ophelia also amazingly doesn't use the word am. She never talks about herself in the play, but how could she do so in the novel? Griffiths says that instead of I am here, she could say see me here with you, or think of me as being here. The constraint, he says, colours the language and the narrative. When it came to creating the musical setting, Hans Abrahamsen took his cue from the constraints in Griffiths' text. In many ways it's an extension of Ophelia's language, as she's able to express new thoughts through her music, but it's also a reflection of the limitations of her words. Take for example the first movement. Really there are only 3 ideas in this 4-minute piece, although it could be argued there are only 2. It begins with descending 2-note chords played by the piccolos, accompanied by celeste and the first and second violins, playing either repeated or held notes based around an F. Both these ideas are present throughout this movement. The descending sequence moves back and forth between the piccolos and oboes in the first section and is eventually taken over by the strings, and the repeating Fs move to the percussion and the harp. When the soprano line comes in, sung perfectly by Barbara Hannigan, it's clearly a new rhythmical idea, but harmonically it takes all of its notes from the piccolo line we've just heard. If we take this piccolo duet, remove the top line and drop it down an octave, we can see that they share a number of notes, and the sequence of those notes is almost identical. The same is true for the second soprano line, which takes its notes from the oboe duet that comes just before it. Within an incredibly short period of time, Abrahamsen has introduced the key ideas of the work, 2 harmonic and motivic patterns that permeate the whole of the 30-minute running time. In the first 30 seconds of the piece, he has defined the language and constraints that will inform the music in every bar that follows. The second half of the first movement seems to mark a shift in texture. Low brass and woodwind chords rise out of an achingly beautiful top B flat from the soprano. These chords sound like a completely new harmonic world, but really they're just an extension of the very first motif played in the piece, the piccolo duet. Not only does the rising and falling pattern in the bass exactly mirror the pattern in this piccolo line, the notes are also taken directly from this motif. If you take the top line in the piccolo duet and invert it chromatically around an F, you end up with the following pattern. This is done by starting on the same note as the original pattern, but instead of the next note being a major third lower, it's now a major third higher. You then continue this until you finish the sequence. All we have to do now is transpose this line down by a major second, and you get the bass line from the chords we've just heard. These are just a few examples of how economical Hans Abrahamsen was with his musical material. But what he ultimately produces through this self-imposed constraint is a work of depth and beauty. He is taking the limited musical language that he has defined, and by placing his ideas in different contexts throughout the work, he is colouring their intent in exactly the same way that Griffiths coloured Ophelia's language. Whenever Abrahamsen introduces a new idea, it is never heard only once. They are continually developed and enhanced as if they're alive. They permeate the structure and combine to create a living and breathing piece of art. Constraint, as Griffiths puts it, can also be a liberation, and Abrahamsen has proved that this can also be true for music. Through Let Me Tell You, he has shown that a composer can produce one of the most direct and powerful pieces of contemporary music by seeing the value in every note that they write.